Hi guys, just before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to ask you a big favor. Assuming you like the content that I'm putting out on this channel, could you please do me a favor and press the subscribe button? It really does help reach more people. And while you're at it, if you could just smash that like button down there, we'd really appreciate it. I just want to get this channel out to as many people as possible, so more and more people are getting exposed to these kinds of stories. And I'll stop talking now and let you get into the episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today, I'm really happy and excited to have on the show Liz Carlson. So for those of you who don't know, Liz actually has a YouTube channel, which is very similar to this, and go check it out because it's super inspiring, sharing recovery stories. And so, yeah, that's Heal with Liz, and we'll talk about that later on. But just to give you some detail on Liz's story, in 2016, she fell ill with a flu-like mystery illness, and she just didn't seem to recover from that point. Her energy levels plummeted, her cognition declined, her digestion fell apart, and most troubling, her minor exertion, often caused immobilizing cellular-level crash the next day, and took many days to recover from. Her early doctors, as we were just talking about before we started recording, kind of comparing our stories, just had no answers. And the internet, as we also talked about, was a wild west of promises that came with a price tag, despair, and conflicting information. She was scared of what was happening to her and felt very lost. Again, I think everyone listening to this can really associate with that. She eventually realized that no one was coming to save her. And after 3 years, she was able to find her way out and heal. And today she's here to tell her story. Thank you so much for coming on, Liz. How are you doing?
Wonderful. And I'm just really honored to be here. And I want to say I love your channel and I love the interviews you do. And I also love the personal videos you do, which are full of truth bombs lately and are just really awesome. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, they're a bit nerve-wracking the first time I did those. So I was like, does anyone actually want to hear from me? But
yes,
I might do a few more. Cool. Well, if we could go back to before 2016, when before you started to get this flu-like illness. What was life like for you before then, like health-wise? Were you always someone who had stuff going on? Were you always healthy, or looking back on it, could you always see like telltale signs?
yeah. Well, I actually was born with a heart condition, but my health was pretty good up until 2015, 2016, when things started to fall apart. Yeah, I would say I had just a very active life. I was working really hard in my career, and I was also the life of the party type of person. So work hard, play hard type of person. Growing up from the time I was very little, I did have a happy early childhood, but then there was a lot of pressure building in my life, starting probably age 5, more seriously age 8, to really succeed at school, to beat the other kids. And yeah, just a lot of pressure to do well in life.
Wow, it's just like aged 8. I think life has just changed so much since then. Like I remember, because now kids are given like a medal for finishing last, and like everything. It's like gone the opposite. I think maybe too far the opposite way. And back then it was like, yeah, if you're not finishing first, if you're not maybe finished first, second, third, then you're not worth talking about. Was that through your own pressure that you put on yourself, or was that through like your parents? Or
my parents are wonderful. They were doing what they thought was best for me. So it was pressure from my parents to get into a good school, get into a good college. There was a lot of pressure on me from a very young age to succeed, and to outperform the other kids. And then, but I already had pressure I was putting on myself. So I just was very stressed out, I would say, when I was growing up. But and then I eventually started a career, and I wasn't really passionate about the career. I would say when I was younger, what lit me up was creative things, inventive things. But, I was told there are 3 career paths. It's like a business person, a lawyer, a doctor. I didn't like science. Didn't like arguing. And so I'm like, okay, I'll be a business person. And I eventually got into marketing and stuff. And I worked for this company for 5 years before getting sick. That I was just killing myself at this company, just trying to prove myself to this company. And Christmas 2015, I pulled an all-nighter on Christmas Eve for some international project. And then 10 days later, I had this crazy episode, the worst headache of my life. I was shaking. I went to the ER. I was sick. And they ended up giving me a CT scan, but they really didn't need to, because they gave me half a Xanax, and then I started to feel better. So that was the first sign things were starting to unravel.
And because it's interesting that, so you kind of had a telltale sign of like your body saying something's not right here, you need to pay attention. I imagine you just at that point, you paid attention, you stopped working, you were, or maybe not, you were probably right back into it in January. And
so I'll tell you what happened. I actually did quit my job.
Oh, wow.
A couple weeks later. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I quit my job, and I promised myself. I even wrote a poem about it somewhere, about the new life I would live, fulfilling my creative passions. Literally 2 weeks later, I take another job in the same field because I felt so worthless, like not having a job for 2 weeks. So I'm like, let me just get a job in the same field. So, and then actually I was fine. I was fine for a few months, actually. In April of 2016, my twin sister came to visit, and I had this flu-like cardiac episode that sent me to the ER. And I told you I have a heart condition, so I thought something was wrong with my heart. They wanted to operate, but my cardiologist luckily got on the phone and was like, you do not want a surgery in the middle of the night. It will probably stabilize. Just go home. So I did, and I was fine. And then in May 2016 was when everything fell apart. I joined my now husband on a work trip. I was jet lagged. I was working for my new company while I was on this trip, but I also was doing a side project from a client from my old company while I'm on this trip and jet lagged. And then we were in Sweden. We go over to Belgium where my husband's family lives. And we're in this park. There's this outdoor zoo, and I'm feeling flu-like, kind of tired. And I'm like, I just want to take the train through the park. And I'm like, oh, and my now husband was like, it's okay, you'll be fine. I'm like, okay, I'll just push through. And I eventually, I start to walk ahead of the people because I'm like, I'll be done faster if I walk faster. But then I thought I was going to literally die because I'm alone in this park. But eventually, they came and helped me to the side of the road, and a park ranger came, and I went back to the house, and I had a fever for 2 days, and I was in bed for 2 days. And then the second I started feeling better, I started to work again. Yeah. And then I ended up I remember I had some coffee and some Nutella. And after that coffee kicked in, something felt like, I don't want to say snap, but it took a turn for the worst. And then I ended up collapsing in the Brussels airport, and they whisked me away. The EKG was going crazy. So I spent a couple of days in the Brussels hospital. Eventually was cleared to fly home. They my local doctors, my cardiologist ruled out any impending heart issues. And I didn't have a primary care doctor because I just went to my cardiologist every year. So I went to just the local primary care near me, and she ran a bunch of tests, and 2 things came back positive. And it was my acute and my chronic EBV antibodies were very elevated. So I'm like, okay, I have mono. I think in the UK and Australia, you call it glandular fever. We call it mono. So she was like, yeah, mono. I'm like, okay, if I had this before, I know you're supposed to just rest for a week. But then I get another email, and she's like, my infectious disease colleague says that mono reactivations don't mean anything. So he had this pet theory that I'm like, but I'm dying here. All my bodily symptoms were starting to fall apart, and I was basically told it was nothing. And, I'm explaining how like my organs are like stabbing pain. I have 0 energy. I'm not getting energy from food. So I was diagnosed with dyspepsia, which is heartburn. Yeah, that's what they said. So, yeah. And I kind of felt infantilized somehow because I'm actually this super tough person. So another thing about me is I actually never missed a single day of school. So my parents, I was never allowed to take a day off school if I was sick. So, and I never cried if I, injured myself. I was just a very tough cookie. And the doctors just kind of completely written me off, and they're like, oh, your tummy pain. I'm like, it's like all my body was falling apart. I literally felt like I was dying. I struggled to breathe. It was like an elephant was sitting on me. But when I was laying down, but when I was sitting up, I didn't have the energy to sit up. It was just really, really terrible. Yeah. So, like yourself, I turned to the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. And at what point what period of time was that? So because spring, when this started happening, at what point were you at the point where you were looking at the internet and you kind of giving up on the doctors?
I would say within the first 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say 2 weeks in, I'm like, okay, they said it's not the mono. So maybe it's leaky gut. Cause so I went down the leaky gut avenue. I found the Dr. X, who are the leaky gut people, the Dr. Gundry, all that stuff, because it kind of made sense because I was eating a lot of canned beans and a lot of raw tomatoes. And I'm like, oh, those are culprits for the leaky gut. So I cut those out. And then I'm like, okay, what could it be? Could it be viral? Could it be a bacteria? So because I had all these immune symptoms as well, with the lymph nodes, just the immune flu, day 1 of the flu-like feeling.
Yeah.
So I started taking supplements, and I had never taken a freaking supplement in my entire life, but I bought them on Amazon. I joke, I paid for the bodyguards on Jeff Bezos's vacations, So I was trying to just kill any bad thing it could be, and also boost my energy in any way. And so I was in the boost and kill mode for a long time. And I had a restricted, I would say, autoimmune paleo diet. And that really helped me just avoid. It wasn't the way out, but it kind of helped me avoid worse or doom, I would say, because I did develop some really bad reactions to once loved foods. And that was probably the most difficult part. I mean, it was part of my identity to be like this lover of life, and holidays. And then you go home for Christmas and then I'm eating like 10 cloves of garlic and your family's making fun of you and you can't like eat what you once loved and you're even more sad about it than they are. And it was really tough with the food. So
how did you deal with that from a relationship point of view, like the relationships you had in your life, like your family, your friends, with the people? Because you said there, like, people making fun. Like, I think people do that when they really don't understand how tough it is what you're going through, and that can be even more frustrating. How did it affect your relationships initially and throughout the process?
It was really tough. My now husband, he was just my boyfriend at the time, was cool about it, and he was like, "Oh, we're eating healthy." He's a great guy, but it was my family didn't really get it as much. And my friends were cool about it. I'll explain more about the friends later. But yeah, it was difficult with family because, I mean, I could see how it looks, blah, blah, blah. I could see why they would have thought, oh, this looks pretty crazy. Like she's all of a sudden eating a bunch of garlic and Googling all the time. And I just remember they were saying like, Elizabeth needs to like stop Googling about bacteria. And because I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me because I got no answers. And so it almost makes you anxious and appear crazy because the doctors didn't have any answer for me. So if there was more recognition from the medical system about chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, I probably wouldn't have had to go through that with confused people like my family members, because I didn't have a diagnosis to give them. All of a sudden, I just can't eat these foods. So they're like, "What's going on with Elizabeth?"
Yeah, I think the minute I realized that it's like I probably would be reacting the same as a lot of them as well, then I think that made me feel better about it all, because it's just difficult for them to get their head around if they're not going through it, or if they're not, like your boyfriend at the time, if you're in it every day, you kind of have to understand it. So had you given up completely on doctors that quickly, like to medical doctors?
No, I saw about 12 doctors in the beginning, and I even got a colonoscopy because I was like, my digestion must be broken, because things were just like passing through. Well, I got this colonoscopy, and then the opposite happened. And there's nothing worse than having CFS, except having CFS and not being able to go. It was just horrible. It sent me into a period of severe, and I really believe there's a gut-brain connection, because when my gut was the worst, my mental health was the worst. I mean, my brain, I had so much brain fog, couldn't string sentences together. That was just a really dark time when my gut was in that bad place. And I had, all the other symptoms.
That's so true. Like, whenever my gut is feeling the worst, I mentally feel a lot worse as well. I think I have made that connection before, but you saying that kind of definitely resonates. Were you therefore, because you had such bad gut issues, you were for a long time saying like just focusing just on the gut rather than other things?
Yeah, I really started with a diet and the supplements. I thought that was going to be the way out. And I saw a bunch of doctors, and then I was like told, I think it's just anxiety about your heart condition, even though I had this condition my whole life and I was fine. But I did see a psychiatrist, and she was actually like, "Liz, you should actually focus on getting a diagnosis." But I did a little bit more, but I never got the diagnosis. But I actually crashed on the way to seeing the psychiatrist, and I realized like, I don't have the energy to keep going to doctors, but I do know that mindset plays a role in something. And I also knew that just talking about my problems, sometimes it helped, but it kind of made me feel worse. It just was like reliving this stuff.
Yeah.
And around this time, I had started to discover meditation, and I was doing Headspace on my own, and I really liked it. So I decided to just kind of give up on the doctors, stop seeing this psychiatrist because I didn't have the energy to go see her. And this local lady in my neighborhood, I found her on some app where it connects you with your neighbors. And she came over and led me in meditations. And it provided a lot of relief. And she also introduced me to things like the law of attraction and Abraham Hicks. And she gave me this CD. I had to get a little CD player to actually play it. And it was about letting go of resistance. So I had such pain everywhere in my body, just not necessarily pain, but discomfort on a cellular level, just so much bodily discomfort that my body had actually tensed up around it. So I would listen to this CD at the end of the day, and it would just release all that tension and all that fight of me kind of resisting my symptoms. And at first, when you're like, let go and you start to really feel it, it can just be a little bit overwhelming, but then it just gradually eased and just kind of dissipated. And yeah. And another thing I did around I would say between the first and second year was I actually found a yoga instructor to help me learn to breathe again. I was breathing wrong.
In what way? Because I've listened. I don't know if you saw in one of the recent episodes. I talked about a book I'd read called Breath, and he talks a lot about people breathing wrong. So yeah, I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, I was kind of breathing extremely shallow through here, and now I breathe like really comfortably through my belly, just like really easy. But it was so shallow and constricted. But the yoga instructor, she taught me how to breathe like into all aspects of my body. So starting with my stomach and then like breathing into different parts of my body, like fully into my lungs. And it at first felt like things were ripping apart, like when I was breathing into these parts of my body. That's how shallow my breathing had become. But she told me like, there's nothing to worry about. You're not hurting anything. And that was reassuring. And then it eventually started to feel really good, just learning how to breathe fully into my body because I was such in that fight or flight mode that I realized later I was in.
And so this alongside with the other stuff you were doing that you've already mentioned, like did you start to make some improvement or where were you at then?
I thought with my perfect diet, I mean, I had 0 sugar, 0 caffeine, 0 alcohol, straight edge. I thought I had it, and like my meditation and the breathing, I thought I was in a good place, but I don't know what it was. I had a bad crash. It was just triggered by restaurant tikka masala. That was it. And my symptoms came back in full force. It was the chest pains. That was the scariest one for me. And all of the flu-like mouth lymph symptoms came back. And I just remember bursting out into tears. It was like, I can't live like this, just walking on eggshells in this bubble anymore. So I'm like, you know what? I gave up on doctors, but maybe I need to give it a chance. I found a doctor. There's a guy named Ryan Pryor. He's an ME/CFS activist. And I found this doctor, and it happened to be close to where my parents live and now live in Atlanta, Georgia. So I found her and I got a bunch of tests. And then one test came back crazy positive, and it was for mold. 107 times the safe limit. And I actually had asked my doctors about mold many times. The exact test that was ultimately ordered, and they just brushed me off.
Yeah, same for me. It took me years and years to test for mold. Wow. And looking back on it, had you kind of been living in a lot of like moldy places, do you think, most of your life?
No, we moved in February 2016 and things fell apart in May. So yeah, I would become almost paralyzed when it would rain really bad. But then when the sun would come out again, I'd feel a little better. So I thought it was just a vitamin D issue. The thing is, doctors look at you like based on average symptoms and the 10 minutes they have based on what they learned in medical school. They're not looking at you like longitudinally over time. Did this person move into a house built in 1910 with a shady landlord who doesn't fix leaks? Does this person get sick when it rains? They're not thinking about you like a scientist. They're just looking at you based on an average from a common symptom. Yeah. And I guess what you might have learned is there's allergies and there's also an inflammatory response. And I didn't have allergies. I had the inflammatory response. So I had the specific test that uncovered it was the C4A inflammation, the T transforming growth factor hormone beta. Those were both elevated. And then because of those tests were elevated, she ordered the mycotoxin panel, and that was 107 times the safe zone. I actually didn't have the black mold in my house. I had an invisible mold that grows on house dust, and our house was so dusty, but it wasn't like this green on the walls. It was just dust everywhere in our dusty home. But the home also just didn't get any sunlight because we were north facing in a row house. So it got no sunlight. And then there was a building in front of us. So it got no sunlight. So yeah, so she offered me Dr. Bullington, she offered me all these IVs and stuff. And then I saw a local doctor who offered me more IVs, and I did a couple of those. But to me, what worked was just getting out of the moldy house. I didn't take my furniture and took clothes I could wash, dishes, because those are fine. Yeah. And I sweated it out. The binders just felt so chalky to me. And, I was still running slow digestively. So for me, I just went in the sauna and sweated out. And that felt amazing. And I started at 3 minutes and I worked my way up to like 45 minutes with a 2-minute break in between. And I know there are people, like Dr. Kat, she's a proponent. You do not have to like remove all the mold of your life to heal, and recovery is still possible in mold. But at the time I wasn't in a capacity where I would have been able to heal because I was still in the fight or flight mode. And it was just such a high level when seeing that test and knowing that my body didn't like it. I had to get out of there.
Did you say you were doing 45-minute sort of, like a 45-minute, 2-minute break and then another 45?
No. 45 minutes with a 2-minute break in between. So at the No.
Was that infrared sauna or?
It was an infrared. I went to my local tanning salon. This was pre-COVID, so I didn't have to worry about that stuff. But I went to my local tanning salon. It was cheap. It was pretty cheap. Yeah, it worked for me, but you have to stay hydrated. So
yeah. Okay. And did you really feel that made like a significant difference just for the sauna alone?
I felt that made a significant difference, but it wasn't my fault to get out because 2 months later, I'd have one of my worst crashes. Oh. So here we go. So I was feeling significantly better, but still not out of the woods. Yeah. We go to Australia. There was a place that had some mold in it. Like there's a place that had some mold, and just the return flight home, just the jet lag or just being on the plane, I crash. My mono comes back again, acute relapse. I'm in a wheelchair. I was just like, I can't live like this anymore. I decide I can't go home for Christmas. I'm like, there's no way I'm getting on this 6-hour flight to Atlanta. So Peter, my now husband, he was then my fiance at that time, was cool with, let's just go to Palm Desert. So we go to Palm Desert, and I'm just like, I get a funny book at the airport. I remember like just getting out of the wheelchair to like even get the book was like, took a lot out of me, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this funny book. I'm just going to read in the desert and just relax. And while I'm there in the desert and they have a sauna there too, so I can keep up my saunas, I go back on Twitter and I had gotten rid of I can't believe I left out this part. I was super into like all the research. At one point, I would say I have like a doctorate on the microbiome from what I've read, and the mitochondria, all that stuff. And then I kind of gave it up cold turkey one day and just like didn't look back. But for whatever reason, I decided to just to check Twitter, and I just clicked on something. And it was to the Toxic Mold Conference. And I'm scrolling through all the speakers, and it's all like detox, this, that. And then I saw something that said NLP. It was Annie Hopper, the creator of DNRS. And I'm like, NLP. I had actually had a positive experience with NLP before, because I saw a mindset coach who hypnotized me, and we uncovered some of my emotional triggers. And so I had a really positive experience with NLP of all things. And that was helpful. But, what I learned from those sessions, I wasn't practicing anything on a regular basis. So I'd have from these hypnosis sessions and my sessions with her, we'd uncover stuff and I'd come out feeling great after the hypnosis. But I didn't have a regular practice, I would lose the high I'd get from that. But she was wonderful. Her name is Lori Soleil. So I discovered DNRS, and I'm like, it's the day after Christmas. So my beloved grandpa actually passed away that day. And so I think, I don't know, I just think he was looking over me when I discovered that, because it was ultimately what ultimately my ticket out. And it wasn't just the program, it was a big part of it. And a lot of it's about reconnecting with joy. And, before all the stress in my life, there were moments of joy, and reconnecting with that. And also, just focusing on the good in your life versus that critical, all the negative thought spirals that I had going on, at my anger with like the doctors, my frustration, like just being sick and all those negative thought spirals. It was just a really helpful modality for me.
When you came across that, was this becoming then a part of something you did every day? Was this something that really moved the needle for you?
Yeah. So DNRS moved the needle for me. I did it every day for 4 months, I would say. I really started to improve within 3 weeks, because I was able to even return home to a rainy weather and still continue to improve. Wow. And I actually didn't do really anything methodical. It was just like, okay, I felt good. I feel good now. I'll walk a little bit more now. I wasn't like pushing myself in any way. And my visualizations, I actually wasn't like visualizing myself walking more. I was actually just trying to create feelings of joy and vibrance by taking myself on these like fun adventures or things I like to do, with things that lit me up and made me feel good, versus like, now I'm visualizing doing this task or this exercise. Okay. So yeah, it was about, more of the feeling and going there.
Okay. That's interesting. That you mentioned Dr. Kat earlier. That's kind of similar to, the stuff that she was talking about, like doing stuff that makes you feel happy, and doing that on it, which I know sounds like when you think about it, it sounds like really simple, but I guess people don't do that, do they? And I think my problem is a lot of the time, I think I'm like there's something deep within me that I'm like a naughty school kid that doesn't want to do schoolwork. And so like sitting down every day to do this thing I don't want to do is like, that's like a brain thing to kind of overcome. And it sounds like you were just doing fun stuff.
Yeah. And I think I have noticed there are people who have resistance to it. And I think one of them, not necessarily saying for you, but from what I observe from people is, one of them is people don't feel safe where they are right now. And people who might have a lot of anxiety about projecting their future because they don't necessarily feel safe where they are right now. And so for me, before I got into it, I was already doing things to make myself feel safe. And another thing is, I would say it really helps if you're going about it with self-compassion and the idea that as you do it more, you'll get better. Because in the beginning, I had one memory. I was like swimming in a pool and I'm like, my arm feels strong. The water is cool, is refreshing. And I just had one memory. I have more than one happy memory, but then you do it more and you get better. But I think another challenge that people have is just like, I don't want it, like the pressure just to heal faster and to like succeed. That can weigh on people, and to kind of let go of that pressure. And so for me, I would say I kind of had sort of an ego death, I would say. And I read books like The Power of Now and things like that. But I didn't like have this, you need to have this timeline to heal so you could succeed in life. No, I got to a place where I kind of changed my identity, where I didn't have that, put so much pressure on myself. So when I then did these visualizations, it was about just like kind of enjoying them versus, doing this so I could be a more productive member of society kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, I think you covered the spectrum there, why people don't probably take to it maybe as much. And I think I'm definitely in the third camp. I think I'm a lot better now, but I'm definitely put a lot of pressure on myself. And I think it gets worse as you have tried more and more things and they haven't worked. The next thing you try has more pressure on, because you're like, there's something inside you saying, I'm running out of things. If this doesn't work, what's the next thing? And I think it's, knowing that this is the thing, because I think with brain retraining, even in the worst case scenario where it wasn't the thing, it's going to help, because you're like, we're all in a fight or flight, and anything that can help with that, like, is going to help. So it's kind of, whereas, me going for, I don't know, an energy, I've done stuff like I've done an energy healing session over Zoom, like, me placing all my hope on that, it's probably not, that's probably not necessarily it doesn't make sense. Out of interest, did you try a lot of weird and wonderful things that kind of like, you would be just speaking to an aunt or someone and they'd be like, oh, I've heard someone with mold, and then they gave you this, like, and then you just went on a wild goose chase and you went, and did you do like a lot of weird things like that?
One of them was my meditation neighbor lady. She was talking about the chakras. We did a chakra meditation, and it led me to finding a Reiki practitioner who clears the chakras, a local man in my area. And I did Reiki. It was in a beautiful room and it was just a beautiful experience. And at the end of the session, he tells me I need to do some work on my sacral chakra, and he just gives me a link to check out. And so I check out this YouTube link. And then I learned that the sacral chakra is also the sex chakra. So he didn't make this clear, but I think reading between the lines, I told my now husband, I was like, my sacral chakra is blocked, and the problem solver he was like, okay, we need to unblock your sacral chakra. That was too much, but yeah, I guess I did get some value from the Reiki man. He was a nice guy. And then another thing I tried was, so in summer 2008, before I had that crash that would lead me to see the CFS specialist, I was living in my bubble and I was wanting to develop an app for diet and meditation for people with CFS. I thought this was the way out. And I remember reaching out to people in my neighborhood through an app called Nextdoor to see if there were other people with CFS in my neighborhood. And there were people right up the street. And I connected with this woman who was actually a former medical doctor, but had to give up that. And she mentioned that her neighbor friend is a craniosacral therapist. And I was like, what's craniosacral therapy? So I went there just with a completely open mind, not expecting much. We go out to her shed, and it's a redesigned shed, but it's a shed. And I remember it being a hot day, and I'm lying down, and she's like moving the energy. I'm not expecting something. And all of a sudden, I have this powerful experience. This image flashes before me of a memory, and a tear, just this large single tear, just comes from my eye. And it wasn't something that I would have thought was a trauma. It wasn't something that was scary. It was a time that I had kind of been shamed or kind of made to feel made fun of. And I just felt it in this memory. I felt shame for doing something that brought me joy. Yeah. I just remember not going in there expecting that that's what would have shown up. So yeah, I think later on, it ended up making sense for me that my path out had a lot to do with reconnecting with my joy.
It sounds like you got the core things right initially, as in, and you kind of, it was just like building blocks, right? You know, you got the diet, you were working with supplements, even though I know supplements can be wide ranging, but then, you know, you got the mold, and then the final. So was the final piece of the puzzle, was that DNRS? Was there?
Yeah. And I'm now actually taking Dr. Katz's course.
Okay.
Because it's very comprehensive. It's quite the masterpiece, because it's combining the somatics with the neuroplasticity, and then finding who you are and your values. And it's quite powerful, though. Since I'm physically, I'm good these days, but so I don't think it is as powerful for me as it is I see for some other people. Because I've also learned a lot of these things on my own too. But yeah, it has opened my eyes up to more about living in my values and purpose. And it does combine the neuroplasticity and the somatics in a nice way.
So after you started taking DNRS, you had 4 months, and you said back home. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
No, but good. So I actually stopped DNRS and decided I'm going to get in super beach body shape for my wedding and forget about DNRS. And then I crashed.
Oh, right.
But then I got back on the horse. I wasn't fully better by my wedding, but I was able to dance the night away. And I was we went on our honeymoon a few months later. And that's when November 2019, I got back on the horse with things, and and I've been good pretty much ever since. But I think, there's those times where you have like, is this a cold? Is it CFS? And reassuring myself, like, so I would just look at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, you're strong. Your body can clear what it no longer needs. All of us who have CFS, it's not avoiding every bad possible thing. It's the resilience, the bouncing back from it. Yeah. So if you do like come down with something or cold or what have you, it's knowing what to do to bounce back. And I actually got COVID over Christmas. And 2 Christmases ago, Christmas 2020, I was fine when other people got sick. But this Christmas, I was the one who got sick. And I noticed it was because I got stressed out by something this Christmas. And last Christmas, I was really relaxed. So I know for me, it's like my stress levels and my ability to recover from stuff, it's interlinked. But I know I have the tools to bounce back from it. But I'm just looking to, become more resilient.
It's interesting. You mentioned like avoiding things, and it's such a, I can't think of any other way to say this than head fuck, to like think about like you're like avoiding foods, avoiding mold, avoiding stressful situations. And then suddenly you're just in this like bubble where you're like, I can't move because I need to avoid everything. And that in itself is like what I learned, when I was speaking to Dr. Kat, and I was, learning a lot about this stuff, is like, actually that in itself can be the worst thing. And I think it's like not about being reckless, so not about just eating cheeseburgers every day, but like if you eat like a tiny bit of gluten or something like that, or you're in a place that does have mold for a couple of days.
Yeah, I can handle that now, but yeah.
It's not going to completely set you back. I think it's just like I mentioned it a few times on the podcast. The minute I heard about mold, I thought it was the best thing ever. But then I started reading books. I think it's called Avoiding Mold. I think that's the actual name of the book.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They have like a group. The thing is, it's like one guy is like Mold Warrior on Twitter, and he will like, try to scare you to death. And it's like, no. And these crazy, the Schumacher protocol or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like insane. I think both extremes, like pretending it doesn't, like if you're in a severe situation, it's probably not the best. Just like it's not the best to like live in the desert without sunscreen. Just it's part of life, but you don't want a lot of it. Yeah. But avoiding it, the bubble will always burst.
Just in terms of like your life now compared to on how it was before all of this, like are you the same person now? Like what ways in which your life is different? Better maybe.
I would say I'm different in that I'm not in the hamster wheel trying to succeed so much. But I'm also wanting to get out there. I guess my ego died, but now it's like, okay, maybe you went too far in that direction. Now it's time to have confidence in yourself career-wise. But I guess I'm more present in life and just grateful and enjoying nature. I think, this whole process, I'm just more present with nature. Yeah. And another one, I'm just more aware of my nervous system, and I feel like I was just coasting in life and without a clear direction, just trying to succeed. And I was living in external validation mode for most of my life until this. And now I'm more, am more connected and aligned, I would say, with my values and things like that. I'm still my fun-loving self. We had a party here recently, a paella party, and I was like drinking from this thing called a Perón, and I had fun, but I no longer go to excess like I did in the old days.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it sounds like you've taken the good things and maybe let go of some of the not so good things, and got some more balance there.
Yeah. And I'm still growing. I'm still learning. Not that you have to constantly be trying to fix or transform every day, but there's a time where it's like, okay, now go live your life now. Okay. I'm still learning, and, I don't have to do all the things I did to get me out of CFS, but I do still have healthy habits that I've kept.
Well, it's funny because I used to see, I remember when I was like in my 20s, and all this stuff was kind of going on, but it was bubbling beneath the surface. So I kind of ignore it and push it, suppress it. And my vision of success was just all the external stuff, like how much money I could get, how quickly I could progress in my job. I would never, ever try to improve myself. It was always something to get more of. And now, once I've been in this process, although I still have got external goals, a lot of this is, when you start to go down the self-improvement route, you kind of, I don't think you ever stop, right? So it's never going to be, I imagine it's the same for you, right? Now you've just started to do this. You're like, well, I don't want to settle for just this. I want another level. I want to get a taste of what's going on up there. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I do have a little bit of that. And I'm trying to also just sometimes just be like, Liz, you don't need to be always learning more and more. Just sometimes follow your own advice on your own blog. Like gave someone wanted advice. She was at 80% and I sent her this article. And then I read this and I'm like, wow, I could definitely be doing these. Cause I was, one of them was like, stop watching the news during crazy news cycles. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm watching the news about the war. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
So it's like, sometimes it's just, so yeah, I guess it's like, for the people watching who are like 50, 60, 70, 80% better, you probably know a lot of things by now, and it might not always be a new thing. If you had a friend with CFS, what advice do you tell them? And then follow your own advice. And
I guess my final question for you, like for someone listening to this right now, who's maybe they've had, it sounds like probably maybe the lowest you were at was when you had that fine, you thought you were pretty much there, thought you were getting to your recovery, and then you had your biggest crash. Talking back to yourself at that time, and people listening to this will be in that similar situation where they're at their darkest hour. What would be your advice to them to keep going and to keep moving forward?
I would say that to anyone at the rock bottom, that this is your launching pad, and the shittier your situation, the more inspiring your recovery story will be.
I love that. That's awesome. Brilliant. It's your launching pad. Yeah, that's brilliant. I do always say to anyone who's ever messaging me, say that you need to come on and share, the goal has to be to come on and share your story, like when you're ready. And so, yeah, I think I might put that as that tagline that you just said then. And so you mentioned you've got a blog and stuff. Could you just give some more detail on that? And like, if people wanted to reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah. I've got my blog, healwithliz.com, my fellow YouTube channel, Heal with Liz, and my Instagram, Heal with Liz C.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's been, super inspiring for me and powerful. So I know it will be for everyone listening. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I can't wait to get this one out to everyone.
Thank you so much, Phil. It was an honor to be here. Yeah.